Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So, welcome everyone to Unveiling and Addressing Property Tax Inequities in Middle Neighborhoods. And really, we're talking about all neighborhoods, right? But since this is a Middle Neighborhoods webinar, we always tack that on. Um, oh, I'm seeing chats. Okay, so my name is Marcia Nedland. I'm one of the organizers for the National Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. I'm doing this from my phone today because for some reason my laptop won't sign on. So I'm a little bit discombobulated, but stick with me. Today we have really a truly amazing panel talking about a very important subject. I'm assuming that most of you have heard about this topic, and that's why you signed on. So let's get into it so that we have plenty of time to hear from them. So just a little bit up front, the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, if you haven't heard of it before, this is a national initiative that's focused on just really raising awareness and sort of networking professionals on the topic of neighborhoods that are neither the most distressed nor are they truly healthy and on autopilot. We tend to overlook them through policy, philanthropy, and everything else. And we're noticing that a lot of them are disappearing right now, either through further decline or gentrification. So this is a joint effort by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. And we have a steering committee, I should say, that helps sort of manage what goes on. And one of our panelists is a member of that steering committee today, as am I. So go ahead, Ann. So again, just a little bit more about middle neighborhoods if you want to know more about what we mean. They tend to be mostly single family homes that were built for families with children, not exclusively, but mostly. They tend to still have more than 50% owner occupancy, which is part of the connection here to the tax issue. The housing stock tends to be aging and generally in good condition or acceptable condition, but it tends to lack the features and amenities that homebuyers are looking for today, which can make them undervalued and sometimes sit on the market longer or be more attractive to investors than to owner occupants. One of the things that's really important, especially I think in this conversation, is that middle neighborhoods are more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower income or their higher income counterparts. And so, although as we'll hear today, the tax inequity issue is at its most extreme when you're looking at the lowest value, housing value neighborhoods versus the highest. We who work in middle neighborhoods know that every middle neighborhood has got block groups in it that are of much lower value than others. So we probably all have parts of our middle neighborhood, if not all of them, that could actually have a problem with tax inequity. So just a little reminder, at our website, middleneighborhoods.org, we have a mapping tool that can give you sort of just a way to begin talking about where the middle neighborhoods in your community might be. It allows you to put in metropolitan area and then to toggle among a number of different income screens by census tract over on the left-hand side. So it only looks at income, which is really only one of the factors that you're ultimately going to want to look at, but it can really give you an idea quickly where your middle neighborhoods might be. So great. Now our panelists. We are going to start with Chris Berry, who is really working on this at a national level and has set up this fascinating mapping database tool that he's going to share with us that will allow us all to look at where the greatest inequities may be. So he's with University of Chicago, as it says here. And he's in particular director of the Center for Municipal Finance there. Really into a lot of interesting things. And I believe actually, Chris, that we probably could have updated your title here, because I think you just moved to take over a larger part of the university. So we'll let you talk about that. Tiffany Smith is associate director at NHS Chicago. And if you haven't heard of NHS Chicago, I'd be surprised. It's a really outstanding, big nonprofit in Chicago. It works in many neighborhoods, has been there for a long time, has an extraordinary lending arm to its work, but it also has a neighborhood lens that it uses through which to deliver its tools. And Tiffany is just doing some really very practical strategies at reaching out to homeowners in the neighborhoods they serve with tools and information that can really help them not only make sure that they're not caught in the middle of a taxing inequity problem, but also to take advantage of other tax exemptions that might be coming to them, et cetera. So just basically making sure that her neighborhood residents are on top of their whole real estate tax game. So she's going to talk to us about that. And she's also a member of our Middle Neighborhood Steering Committee. And Dr. Bernadette Atuahene is somebody that I've had the honor of speaking to for one time on the phone. She is setting the world on fire, at least the United States on fire, with this topic. She is a professor of law. She's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but I think I've also heard some recent updates to where she's doing her work. But the most specific thing that I guess that people know her for right now on this topic is that she really spearheaded a lot of work in Detroit at identifying the inequity in taxation there, and has really changed enormously the dynamic of what goes on there. Meanwhile, she is also working and achieving some real milestones in sort of creating a national movement around this issue. So I welcome all three of you. Our agenda today is that we'll basically give each panelist some time to present from their angle, the angle I've asked them to present from on this topic. Then we should have 20 to 30 minutes for audience Q&A, and we'll close out. So we're going to start with Chris Berry, and I think he's going to load up his slides here in a second. Yes, we're starting to screen share. Hi, Chris.
Good morning, Marcia. Thank you. Let's see here. Let me just put this in slideshow mode. We'll be good to go. What am I missing here?
This is always a moment in maybe go click on slideshow and then run it.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone seeing that? Awesome.
Perfect.
Thanks. Wow. Okay, so thanks so much for the invitation to be here. I'm really delighted to speak to your group, and I'm especially thrilled to be sharing the program with my friends Tiffany Smith and Bernadette Atuahene, who are doing such important and, in fact, essential work in this area. So luckily for me, I get to go first because I wouldn't want to have to follow either of them. And let me just dive right in. So what I want to do is just give a little bit of background on property tax assessment itself. And I know that we have a lot of experts on the call, but just a couple issues that even some experts don't always fully appreciate. I'll talk a little bit then about the issue of regressivity, how would we know when we see it, why does it matter, why is it so pervasive, and then finally, what can we do about it? Can it be fixed? So let's start with a little bit of background. I think everyone on this call certainly knows that your property taxes are meant to be based on the value of your home. The dirty little secret of property taxes is that, in fact, we don't really know the value of your home. So in contrast to other ad valorem taxes, like say a sales tax, when you pay a sales tax, there's really no dispute as to what the value of the item is because you're paying the tax at the time you make the purchase. So if you buy $1,000 TV, you're taxed at the time you buy it, and we all can agree that it's worth $1,000. With property, however, people are taxed every year on the value of their property, but of course, people are not buying their house every year, and so we don't know exactly what it's worth because we don't have a transaction on it. And that's why we have this job called the assessor, and the assessor's job is to figure out the value of, in fact, all the properties in the jurisdiction where the assessor operates. Without getting into any kind of details, we'll just say that the assessors typically are using some kind of a statistical model to do this. And this means that if there's flaws in the statistical model or inaccuracies in the statistical model, those are going to translate into flaws and inaccuracies in the taxes you pay. In particular, if the assessor says your home is worth more than it really is, you'll pay taxes that are too high. If the assessor says your home is worth less than it really is, you'll pay taxes that are too low. To give you a sense of how this works, let's just consider the world's simplest jurisdiction. Okay, in this jurisdiction, there's only two houses. There's the one on the left, which maybe we can just call that the middle house or the modest house. That house is worth $100,000. And then on the right, we have the fancy house. And to keep things simple, I've just made that worth $200,000, so twice as much. The levy in this jurisdiction, and when I say levy, I just mean the total amount of taxes that this jurisdiction wants to collect is $1,500. That's the total amount of taxes we need. And if the system is fair, the house on the left, the modest house, should pay 1/3. Why 1/3? Because it's $100,000 house out of $300,000 of total value. That's 1/3 of the total value. And so in a perfectly functioning system, this modest house pays $500 or 1/3 of the levy, while as the fancy house pays 2/3 of the levy or $1,000. But suppose the property taxes assessments are regressive. In particular, suppose in this case, the assessor says that the $100,000 house is actually worth $125,000, whereas the $200,000 house is only worth $150,000 in the assessor's estimates. What that's going to mean is because the taxes are based on those assessor estimates, the house on the left is going to pay too much. It's going to end up paying, in fact, 45% of the levy, while the house on the right is going to end up paying too little, only 55% of the levy. And this is going to generate something I refer to as a tax shift. It's basically taking taxes that should have been paid by one property and moving them over to another. So in this case, that's tax shift at $182. The expensive house should have been paying $182 more. The inexpensive house ends up paying that. So that's the general idea. Now, there's an even more subtle way in which this comes into play, and it's important to appreciate this. Let's continue with the same two houses, but let's suppose that the way in which the assessor makes regressive assessments is by undervaluing both properties. Okay, so now in this example, the $100,000 house is assessed as if it's worth $90,000. If you're the owner of the $100,000 house, the modest house, and you get that assessment and you say, hey, I'm only assessed at $90,000. This means the assessor is treating me well. I'm getting a good deal. Okay, I've been underassessed by $10,000. Well, in fact, what you don't know is that the expensive house, the person at the top, is underassessed by even more. Okay, so that house is assessed at only $150,000. It's getting a much bigger break on its assessment. You, the owner of the modest house, ends up paying too much in taxes, even though you're undervalued, because what really matters is how you're valued relative to the other properties, okay? Because that levy, that $1,500 is going to be collected no matter what. It's just a question of how it's divided between the houses. So in this example, the modest house, even though it's undervalued by the tax assessor, is overtaxed because it is less undervalued than the expensive house. And this is a common tactic that assessors use to kind of make everyone think they're being treated well is, well, what if we underassess everybody a little bit, but we underassess those at the top by
I
a
don't
lot?
think you can hear me.
Okay?
Oh, Chris,
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, your
Sorry.
video is kind of, your audio is breaking up on us. I wonder if you could try just turning your video off. Sometimes that helps. There you go. So
Okay.
let's.
Is this should I go back or did you hear enough? Where should I?
I think you should go back just, one slide worth.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, right about
Okay,
there-ish.
so sorry about that. Let's go in again. So in order to give the example of property tax inequities, I just conjured up here this imaginary and very simple jurisdiction with only two properties. Is the audio better now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So in this very simple world, this jurisdiction has only two properties, the modest property on the left, the fancy property on the right. The modest property is worth $100,000. The fancy property is worth twice as much, $200,000. The levy, or which is the total amount of taxes that this jurisdiction needs to collect, is $1,500. So we need $1,500 in taxes collected as between these two houses collectively. If the system were fair, the modest house on the left should pay $500, or 1/3. And the reason is that modest house is worth 1/3 of the total value. The total value is $300,000. If you're worth 1/3, you should pay 1/3 of the taxes. If the assessor, however, has valued these properties regressively and said that the $100,000 house is actually worth 125, so they've overvalued the low-priced house, then it's going to turn out that that house ends up paying too much in taxes, because again, your taxes are based on the assessed value. Meanwhile, the assessor has undervalued the fancy house, saying it's worth 150,000 when in fact it should be worth 200,000. So rather than paying 1/3 and 2/3 respectively, in this example, the modest house ends up paying 45%, the expensive house 55%. This is going to generate what I refer to as a tax shift, which is taking part of the tax burden that should have been paid by the more expensive house and shifting it onto the tax bill of the less expensive house. In this example, that amounts to $182. Now, this is a simple example where it would be obvious to both homeowners what was going on, but in fact, in practice, it's often more complex than this. So let's consider an example where the assessor has actually undervalued both houses, and this is a more common situation. So let's look at this home on the left. Suppose this home is valued at $90,000 by the assessor. If you're the owner of that home and you get that assessment, you're going to think to yourself, hey, I'm getting a good deal. I'm being treated well. I know my home's worth $100,000, but I'm only assessed at 90. I'm getting a break. But what you don't see is that this more expensive home is undervalued even further. Okay, that expensive home is only valued at $150,000. That's a bigger reduction. And so there's still a tax shift. In other words, as the owner of the modest home, even though you're underassessed, you're still overtaxed. And that's because somebody else is being underassessed even more. And because that levy is a fixed amount, the only question at stake is how much does each party pay? You can actually be overtaxed even though you've been underassessed when others are underassessed by more. And that's one of the features that makes it so hard for an individual person to understand how the system works and to understand whether they've been treated fairly or not, because most individual people are only seeing their own tax bill, when in fact, to figure out how the system is working and how you're being treated, you have to see other people's tax bills as well. Okay, so this is going to be a very important point, and as I'll explain later, I've created a website that tries to convey this information for people, that displays the whole distribution of tax bills in their jurisdiction, because you really can't learn this from looking only at your own tax bill. All right, so that's a hypothetical made-up jurisdiction. How we really study this in practice is by doing something called a sales ratio study, where we collect the data on all the homes that have sold in a jurisdiction, let's say in some period of time, maybe the last year, and we look at what is the average ratio. That is, what's the value of the assessment relative to the sale price. So if your home sells for $100,000 and it was assessed at $100,000, that ratio would be 1. Okay, if you're assessed at more than what your home sold for, that ratio is going to be greater than 1. And of course, if you're underassessed, the ratio would be less than 1. And what we look to see, of course, we don't expect the assessor to be perfect. This is not going to be a 1 for every home. But if these errors are random, we can say that the system is unbiased. And that just means for any home, whatever its price, if on average for homes of that price, the ratio is 1, that system is fair. And that would look at something like this dashed orange line here. The average assessment ratio, regardless of the price of the home, is a 1. Whereas an unfair system looks more like this blue line here. It's a downward sloping line, meaning that the properties that are of lower value tend to have ratios above 1, whilst properties of high values tend to have ratios below 1. And that's a regressive system where there's overtaxation at the bottom and under taxation at the top. Okay, so that's a theoretical graph. We now can turn to some actual data. So I'll start with Detroit, where Bernadette and I have done work. This is from most recent round of assessment values in Detroit. And now we're looking at real data. So this blue line now represents real data in Detroit for homes at different price points. And what you can see is exactly that kind of regressive relationship where homes at the bottom have higher ratios than homes at the top. In Detroit, it happens to be that the target ratio is 50%. That's this dashed line here. And you can see this variation where the homes at the top are far below that, the homes at the bottom are far above that. And that's a pattern of regressivity now in the actual data. Now, much of my work has been taking place in some particular cities, but I've also been investigating this problem nationwide. And this is a study called Reassessing the Property Tax. You can find it on my website, which I'll link you to later. But essentially what I'm doing is creating these same kind of estimates for all the jurisdictions in the country using a nationwide data set from a vendor called CoreLogic. And what I find is that there is this kind of inequity, what we refer to as regressivity or vertical inequity, in about 90% of the jurisdictions in the United States. And this is true however you'd like to measure it. Assessors spend a lot of time hand-wringing over exactly how to measure this inequity. And to save you the agony of trying to understand all these different metrics, I'll just tell you whichever one you'd like to choose, we're going to find out that there's regressivity. One of the consequences of this, or correlates of this, is that there's also a racial disparity in assessment levels. So predominantly African-American neighborhoods are substantially overassessed on average compared, say, to white neighborhoods. I want to be clear that I am not claiming that assessors are racially motivated. I'm not saying they set out to overtax minority neighborhoods, but I am saying that this is a consequence of overtaxing lower-priced homes. Given that we know that on average, African-American families own lower-priced homes than white families, when we overassess low-priced homes, just due to that correlation, we will find that we'll be overtaxing homes owned by African-Americans as well. And I'll show you that in the data momentarily. In the interest of time, I won't explain all the details, but this is nationwide data in the sense of underlying these graphs I'm showing you are about 40 million residential transactions that I've collected data on. And in each case, what we do is we take a home when it sells, we look at what was the assessed value in place for that home when it sold, and then we calculate that ratio. And this is pooling all those 40 million observations from around the country. And the way to think about it, when you look at the axis here, relative price, a 1 means that you would be the median home in your jurisdiction. Okay, so the median, if you're a 1 on relative price, that means your home had the median price. 2 would mean your home was twice the median price. And then relative assessment ratio is whatever the assessment ratio is in your jurisdiction. As I said, in Detroit, it's 50%. Other jurisdictions, it's 100%. Whatever it is in your jurisdiction, if it's a 1, it means you've assessed at the median rate. Above 1 means more. And again, we just see these downward sloping blue lines for both the assessment ratios and for the tax rates. So because assessments translate into taxes, we can see this. And so what you can see is that the home at the bottom is paying an effective tax rate about twice of the homes at the top. Let me say that again. The homes at the bottom end of the price scale end up paying effective tax rates that are twice what the homes at the top of the price scale are paying because of these regressive assessments. As I said, again, this results in racial disparities. And so what I've done here is I've taken each of the homes, and I want to just be clear, I don't know the race of the homeowners, but I know the neighborhoods that the homes are located in. And so I've taken each home of these 40 million homes that I've studied, and I've looked at the census tract they're located in, and then what's the racial composition of the census tract. And that's what this graph is depicting. And so on the right, what we're looking at are those homes that are those homes that are in census tracts that are 90 to 100% African American. So those are the dot all the way on the right of this graph, and the relative assessment ratio is a ratio relative to the median. And so that's 1.56. And what that's telling you is that the average home in an African-American neighborhood is assessed at 156% of the rate of other homes within its same jurisdiction. Again, that's I'm not arguing that assessors are doing this intentionally, but I am arguing that this is a byproduct of overtaxing and overassessing lower valued homes. And if you want to see what this looks like in a more fine-grained way, these are maps of some particular jurisdictions. And what you can see that I've done is that here undervalued is going to be the kind of turquoise color, and then overvalued is the more purplish color. And then the census tracts are highlighted. I've outlined in black those tracts that are majority African-American neighborhoods. Okay, and I'll give you a second to just kind of look across these maps for yourself, but you can see in location after location after location, the fact that the majority African-American tracts are on the high end or the overvalued end of the property tax assessments in their location. All right. Now, I want to refer you to a website that I've created where you can find this information for your own jurisdiction. I want to ask you not to go do it now, tempting though it may be, because hopefully we can keep your attention on the webinar. But when we are done today, the URL here is at the top of the screen. It's propertytaxproject.uchicago.edu. If you go to that website, you click on interactive reports, it'll take you to a drop-down menu where you can choose your county or city, and you can get a report with similar kinds of graphs and information to what I've just shown you. And you can see the extent of the problem, if there is one, in the area where you live. All right, so that's the problem. Now let's talk about its consequences. Why does this matter? Why should we care? Well, first, I've already explained this tax shifting. I gave a simple example of a tax shift of only a couple $100 in my made-up jurisdiction with 2 homes. But in fact, in practice, this tax shift is in the billions of dollars in big cities like Chicago and New York City. That is to say, we're taking billions of dollars that should have been paid in property taxes from people at the top and shifting it onto everybody else. So the real life tax shifting is quite consequential. There is also a very opaque and one could say draconian system of dealing with tax delinquency. So in other words, what happens to somebody who can't pay these taxes that, by the way, were likely too high, were unfairly high in the first place? Well, you can end up losing your home. And I think we'll hear more about this from our other panelists, so I won't go into a lot of details about this. There was a Supreme Court case regarding this that was decided this summer that will hopefully make the system a little bit better. But in Detroit, where Bernadette and I have done work, fully 25% of all homes in Detroit have been foreclosed for failure to pay property taxes. Not talking about foreclosures by a bank, but rather for failure to pay property taxes. And again, property taxes that were dramatically too high in the first place. The destruction of generational wealth. Again, when you're taking a home from someone and to pay an unpaid property tax debt, they lose that ownership of home, lose the ability to pass that on. And then we could talk about the question of whether jurisdictions themselves are losing money, revenue that could be spent on schools, for example, due to underassessment. So just quickly on each of these things, these are the tax shift in Chicago and in millions of dollars. So I've divided the homes in Chicago according to their price decile. So 1 would be the 10% homes with the lowest price. 10 is the top 10% of homes. And this is just under our past assessor, Joe Barrios. That number was about $800 million underpaid by people at the top that is then shifted onto everyone else. Because again, when somebody is underpaying, others have to pay more in order to keep the funding the same. So that's the example of a tax shift. Again, just a little bit on Detroit here. And Detroit is admittedly an extreme case, but we've seen similar studies in other places where similar things are going on. And again, this is from a graph from a paper that Bernadette and I wrote, is showing you that the probability that you end up in a tax foreclosure is very strongly related to the extent to which you've been overassessed. So this upward sloping line here is just saying the higher was the assessment ratio, the more you were overassessed, the more likely it is that you're going to end up in a tax foreclosure, losing your home. Are the cities losing revenue? That's a somewhat open question. Sorry, is somebody talking to me? Okay, I'm going to continue on. in a levy-based system, no, jurisdictions don't lose revenue because the amount of money they collect is fixed. Really, what's going on is the tax shifting. In a rate-based system, you could end up losing revenue. I'm happy to say more about that for people who are interested. The indirect effects, I think, are also important, which is to say, when the property taxes are very unfair, it undermines people's faith in the property tax system. And you've all probably seen the studies about the property tax being the most hated tax. And I think this is playing a part to that. Quickly on why this is happening, I'm happy to talk a lot more about this, but there are two categories of problems. One is the problems on the assessing side, and one is that assessors have imperfect information, and whenever you have missing features of a home, this is going to result in some kind of regressivity from a statistical perspective. This is a amended variables problem. Sometimes even with the data they do have, they're not doing a great job on modeling it. And you can see that in just the maps I showed you, where these errors are very highly correlated across space, which is telling you they're not doing a good job of modeling neighborhoods. And then there are some policy choices we make that exacerbate the problem. Assessment increase caps, which are often meant to help people, say, who are on a fixed income, prevent their assessments from going up over time, have the unintended consequence of holding taxes down for the properties whose values are growing fastest. Appeals contribute to this problem. Granting appeals, that's typically the people who own the most expensive homes who are the most likely to appeal. I'll close on a more optimistic note. In Chicago, we elected a reform-minded assessor a few years ago named Fritz Kagi. He's just completed his first rounds of reassessment of the city. And I'm comparing, in the blue line here is his predecessor, Barrios, who was the one booted out of office, who had quite regressive assessments. And then the red line here is the most recent round of assessments from Kagi, showing that the system can be fixed. And we're happy in the Q&A to get into exactly what they did in order to fix that. But I think to end on a hopeful note, we can address these problems. They can be fixed when people set their minds to it. So although the problem is pervasive, it is not inevitable. And then there again is a link to the URL if you want to see what's going on.
Wow, Chris, I'm sitting here kind of stunned. Although you and I've spoken before, I've never seen your presentation before. And that's a lot to digest. And I just can't thank you enough for putting in graphic form that everybody can understand just what a significant issue this is. I really appreciate it. And I know there are going to be lots of questions for you, but let's switch over to Tiffany now. Hey, Tiffany. As I mentioned before, Tiffany is at Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. She is like the epitome of somebody who's taking this data that Chris does and figuring out how to translate that to actions in neighborhoods that actually benefit the residents that she's serving. So Tiffany, go ahead and share your slides and take it away, and welcome.
So I am going to share and share. And then I just want to remind folks, we are going to kind of go through all of the presentations first, so we don't want to miss your questions. So please, please, please put them in the Q&A box. And we promise we are going to leave time to circle back on that. I love where Chris kind of handed the ball to me because he definitely sets the stage of the challenges we face in our communities. At Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, Marcia alluded to it a little bit earlier, we have been around for 48 years and really focus on helping people buy, fix, and keep their homes, and in neighborhoods of choice. And I am a second-generation Southsider and firmly believe that each of our neighborhoods should be neighborhoods of choice. And so a lot of the work that we do in our neighborhood strategies team is to be boots on the ground, to really understand what the challenges are out there for our homeowners and those who want to be homeowners, and move as many obstacles out of the way as possible. Get that information back to our homeownership team, which is responsible for counseling, to our redevelopment team, who finds those spaces that help us lift the blocks that may have too many vacant properties on them, or to get that information to our policy team so that they can begin working with the Housing Policy Task Force to advocate for the changes that need to be made. To that end, let's kind of go next steps with what Chris started us out with. So he showed you an image of, you know, where those overassessments seem to be taking place in the Cook County and Chicago area. And I just wanted to kind of start with, well, when you aren't able to fulfill your tax debt after 2 years, your property becomes eligible for the property tax sale. And so the data, the graph on your left, or the picture on your left, is a plotting of the taxes that were sold and they're for their tax year 2020 in the Cook County area. Those of you who are not familiar with Chicago and the Cook County area may not know that we are still a very ethnically divided, neighborhood-driven city and county. And so you will often find owners of homes that are Black and brown on the south and west sides of Chicago. What you will notice from that picture, where the significant concentration of those property taxes sold, they appear on the south and west sides of Chicago and in our south suburbs, which are more often, or a lot more prevalent to be Black and brown homeowners as well. What you'll see on the right are taxes that are forfeited. And when we say taxes that are forfeited, those are the property taxes that are not purchased. And so you will see where those also tend to be. You'll see there's less in those little, in the more strategically southern area. There is a part on the south side that is traditionally where our police officers live, that is on the cusp of the city. And you'll see those taxes are not being bought over there. So I did want to start there to kind of give us some context, as well as to give you some insight into what taxes are being bought, because it gives some insight into why we are so passionate about the work we're doing around property taxes and making sure people are getting in front of the challenge. Property taxes.
When you say property taxes are being bought, as I understand it in Chicago, delinquent.
I was going to get to.
Yeah, will you explain that?
Yep, that's what we're going into now.
Okay.
So in our system in Cook County, to ensure that we are able to fund our operations, be it money going to our schools, to our South suburban municipal operations, which are they really rely on their property taxes. So we need to make sure that that debt is cured. The structure we have in Cook County is that there are private tax buyers that pay the debt. They bid to say what percentage interest they will want to charge on the debt that they are buying to the person who would then pay them back. More often than not, in that first year of buying that tax delinquency, they'll say 0%, more often than not. And we'll get into that in a second. There's a strategy there. But these are not governments. These are investors that are making a bet and saying, we will pay off these property taxes. The person then has up to 2 years to cure that debt with the person who has bought their taxes, along with any interest and fees that may have accumulated, or they can go in and ask for that deed. So when we say people are losing their homes to property tax, it is a process, but it is one that can move rather quickly, particularly if you do not have the financial wherewithal to correct and cure the debt immediately. The graph you're looking at right now really does give some insight into the thought behind this, right? So if you were to look at those property taxes that were sold in the 2020, for their tax year 2020, those in the previous year, meaning prior to their taxes going delinquent, who had no issues paying their property taxes, overwhelmingly, those property taxes are being bought at 95% of those taxes being bought. 2 years, a little bit less, 3 years, about 85%. Those taxes that people didn't want to purchase, well, you see a much smaller bite on those, people who are saying, no, we don't want these on the first years being delinquent. And so it begs the question, what's going on here? Is it a strategy? Yes, it is a strategy. Our Cook County Treasurer has posted a number of articles really digging into the challenges with our existing system with the property tax sale. From the, people putting in and buying for, putting in auction bids or putting in bids to buy the property taxes, and then finding, that there is one air conditioner missing and saying, oh no, that was a sale in error. Then we have to pay that as a municipality or as a county, pay that back. That being a costly component to the property tax sale. But overwhelmingly, those who are most impacted by this property tax sale are our residents in Black and Brown communities who have more often than not paid off their homes. And I want that to sit with people for a minute. People who have done what they're supposed to do, right? They figured out how to clear that 30-year mortgage or the 15-year if they were really able to do that, but they have finished paying off that mortgage. And now they're just having to pay those property taxes. They don't have that monthly escrow account. And these are the ones that are being most impacted by the property tax sale, as well as the heirs of those who are the heirs of those who have paid off those property taxes. So as people who work in the community, we had to take a step back and say, what can we do? This is absolutely ridiculous. The government should not be in the business of really taking the homes from those who worked so hard for them, for the homes, who were kept out of the home ownership realm for so many years, and who can least afford all of the additional fees and interest that go with the property taxes that were, if you remember what Chris was talking about previously, had already been overassessed. And so they were paying more than they should have been paying anyways. Well, we'll talk about the advocacy component of it in a second, but we took a step back and said, what tools do we have in our pocket right now to help our homeowners? And so one of the first things we thought we would do is look at what resources we have available to us. At Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, we firmly believe an educated homeowner is an empowered homeowner. And so first order of business is making sure we're educating our residents. So first and foremost, our financial self-defense courses, which really walks our homeowners, and we spend a lot of time with our seniors on this one, or our more aged residents, on what it is they need to be looking at in their monthly cost of home ownership that can help them decrease that cost and allow them to reinvest it in their homes. And so in the financial self-defense class, we look at the cost of their home insurance. We look at, did they claim all of their exemptions? We look at their energy costs and things of that nature. In addition to that, we do regular workshops on property tax appeals. As the professor will probably talk about a little bit later when she comes on, but as Chris alluded to, more often than not, the residents in these communities that are most impacted by the property tax sale are not appealing their property taxes. And so trying to make sure that our residents understand, A, it's your right, you can appeal. Two, it does not decrease the value of your home, because that is always an issue when we look at valuation of properties within the Black and Brown community and the appraisal gap. So people are very cautious about that. But no, it's not going to decrease the market value of your home. And three, there are tools for you to do this, and we're going to walk you through it step by step on how you can appeal your property taxes. Yes, there are attorneys that can do it for a fee, but you yourself can do it as well. In addition to that, we do hands-on property tax exemption clinics. We actually have one coming up on the 7th in our Woodlawn area, which is an area on the south side of Chicago, near where the Obama Presidential Library is being built. And so there is significant impact that is being felt there from a gentrification perspective, and those who have endured very hard times in that community and now at risk of being displaced now that the times are getting good in that community. So doing a hands-on property exemption clinic to walk them through what they're eligible for. And we'll go into what they're eligible for in the next slide, as well as our PITIE counseling and the advocacy to which I referred. So when we talk about decreasing the cost of monthly home ownership, one way is making sure we're claiming all of our property tax exemptions. And as Chris alluded to before, there are pluses and minuses to those. We focus on three really big ones that are most impactful for our residents in those target neighborhoods. And in particular, it's making sure they claim that homeowners exemption and the seniors exemption. And for our seniors who earn less than $65,000 a year, making sure they are every year reapplying for the senior freeze. The beauty of the senior freeze in Cook County, it allows those seniors who have an income of less than $65,000 over time to decrease their tax burden to zero. But they have to continually do that, continually reapply for that senior freeze as long as that income is less than $65,000. A lot of attention, a lot of time is spent in the community making sure our homeowners are making use of the exemptions that are available to them. If we were to look at the tax year 2020, a homeowner's exemption could save you up to $687 a year. So seems like a small amount, but if you're on a fixed income, if you just inherited this house from your grams and you're not at a position in your career where you can write a check for $5,000, $687 is helpful. So making sure we are taking advantage of all opportunities that each of our homeowners are legally allowed to take, make sure they're taking advantage of those. The long-term homeowners exemption a lot of times will not really give our residents the savings that they think they might get. But in those areas that are gentrifying quickly, it is one that we do look to make sure that, A, have they been notified that they're eligible? If not, why not? If that area is turning quickly, because again, that can save you significant amounts of money on your property taxes. So in addition to showing people what the impact of those exemptions are on their tax debt or their tax liability, we also show them how to go back and reclaim past ones. So certificates of error are what they called in Cook County. We literally bring in laptops, or we will go step by step on the brick screen, showing people how to complete that certificate of error online, so that that money can then be refunded to them and they can use that money to pay their current tax debt. Additionally, there's a significant amount of money in overpayments that people have not claimed, and we show our residents how to go about going and mining and seeing if those claims, if those dollars are out there for them, so that they can claim those dollars and apply that to their outstanding property tax debt. I alluded to our PITIE counseling, which we are very proud of at NHS Chicago. Of course, we're all familiar with the property. So PITIE, I'll break it down for you, which is principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and energy. So mortgage loan stuff, making sure, mortgage payments are being applied correctly, things of that nature. But the insurance part is something we found an opportunity for with our seniors to make sure, and our residents in general, to make sure that they are paying a rate that makes sense. We've been finding that through price optimization, some of our residents are being charged, $4,000 in property insurance annually for a two unit when really it should be no more than $2,300. So helping them identify those areas of savings again, so that all of that monthly savings they can put towards any property tax debt or reinvesting in the property. Again, we already talked about the property tax exemption component, and then their energy costs, making sure that they are paying the lowest regulated rate. And so in that lowest regulated rate in Chicago, it's like People's Gas and ComEd have typically will carry the lowest regulated rate. So making sure we go and check that they have not been changed in their provider, which has been happening, again, so that they can apply those dollars to that debt. And then advocacy. So it's interesting. I actually came across this issue of the impact of property tax sales in my community in my first couple of years working with the organization. And we got the list of the properties because we were going to go door knocking and say, hey, are you aware your property is on the property tax sale list? And what can we do if you are aware? And so the impact, and when we were door knocking, seeing who was opening those doors, really did kind of take my breath away. And so we communicated that to our policy team and the housing policy task force, which has worked with a number of organizations in the county, both nonprofits as well as advocacy groups for our South suburban mayors and things of that nature, to really say, we need to stop and take a look at what we're doing. In essence, the goal from our perspective in policy initiatives right now in Cook County are to create a way for our residents to pay and stay. Displacement of homeowners from homes that they have paid for is not the business that government should be in, and we should be doing whatever we can to help minimize displacement of our residents and still cure the debt. I think it is apparent to all of us who live in these urban centers in particular that we do need the property tax revenue to make our municipalities run and to function. The question, though, is how do we help people cure the debt? And do we do it in such a way that A, maintains dignity, 2, allows people to cure the debt, in a way that helps them stay in their homes. And 3, that encourages even more return to our city for those that have been losing population. So in doing so, we're hoping to divert properties away from the annual tax sale by providing monthly payment plans for people in the Cook County area to cure their debt. Again, need the debt cured. And I can't stress enough some of our smaller municipalities in the county that really are so reliant on that debt being cured, which, sometimes the property tax sale is a panacea because they think that that property tax has been sold and then there's a sale in error and they're still not getting their money. This is a way to ensure that people are paying their debt and cutting out the middleman. It's going right back into the county. And then also decreasing the friction in the redemption journey map, because we are seeing that those properties that have gone through the property tax sale and folks want to redeem their properties are challenged at every turn to get it done, from the interest rates that must be done to the paying in certified funds. You can't even use your Chase account just to do the transfer. It has to be certified funds. Just really putting obstacle in the way of our residents to actually cure a debt that A, is the result of years of overassessment, B, is the result of interest rates that were just unbelievable. Just recently in this last legislative session, we were able to get the interest rate for delinquent property taxes decreased in Cook County, which is a welcome blessing, but it's been halved. So it's only 9% as opposed to what it was before. And then the fees that are associated with redeeming the property. So I am going to pause there and let the professor talk about what they are doing in Detroit, and then we'll circle back and talk more about how we are engaging our partners in the community to really advocate more for our residents, as well as what we're doing on the ground with our partners on the door knocking campaigns.
Thank you, Tiffany. If I'd had my camera on, you would have seen my head nodding like this the whole time you were talking. It's really great. So Dr. Bernadette, it's so nice to have you join us, and we're going to turn it over to you. And just a reminder, everyone, Dr. Bernadette really has turned Detroit on its head in terms of their tax policy, and she's spreading that knowledge and that advocacy across the nation. So let's hear how she's doing it and how we all need to get on board with this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am ridiculously excited to be here with two people who I'm working closely with, Tiffany and Chris. And also, I'm just grateful to my dear friend and colleague, classmate, I should say, Chris Tyson, who pulled me into this middle neighborhoods work when he came to lead the National Community Stabilization Trust. So thank you to Chris for this. All right, let's get it going here. All right, what's going on in Detroit? In Detroit, since 2009, 1 in 3 properties have completed the property tax foreclosure process, completed it, 1 in 3. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. And so, you know, for those of you who don't know, Detroit is the Blackest city in America as well. So we have a situation where over 100,000 families, majority Black, have been, again, it's the government taking their homes, and not, you know, it's not mortgage foreclosure where you don't pay your mortgage and your home gets taken. It's property tax foreclosure. Right. And so activists on the ground have started to call this a hurricane without water, because just like Hurricane Katrina, it has devastated entire communities, leaving blight and vacancy in its wake. Just to give you a visual of what it looks like, every red dot here is a house that has been subject to property tax foreclosure in the city of Detroit. When you look a little back, you can see what this looks like on the neighborhood level. And when you look, you can see what it looks like at the city level. There is not there are not many neighborhoods unaffected by this property tax foreclosure crisis in Detroit. So the question is, what in the world is going on? Or as my residents here, I'm actually here in Detroit because I do ethnography. So I live in the place I study. So I'm actually speaking to you now from the east side of Detroit. And so as my residents would say, they wouldn't say what is going on, what the hell is going on, okay? And so part of the story is that during the Great Recession and the mortgage foreclosure crisis, housing prices took a precipitous dive nationally, but it took a really steep dive in Black and brown communities where these banks were doing the predatory lending. And in places like Detroit, you could see the housing prices fell and they never recover, right? And this is a very same time Detroit is going through the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. So it really just doesn't have the people power, the capacity to adjust prices on the assessments to match these drastically new home values caused by corporate misbehavior. All right, just so you can follow me, the property tax bill in Michigan is different than in Chicago. Chicago has something called a levy system where they decide the number that they have to collect and everyone pays a share. Michigan has something called the millage system, all right? And basically how that works is there's no number that the government has to get to. It's just your taxable value times your property tax rate or your millage rate, and that's how you decide your property tax bill. All right, just so we're all on the same page. All right, what's going on here? So before I started my work in Detroit, there had been quite a bit of work on a couple of things. Number one, there had been quite a bit of work on property tax rate inequity. There had been some work because Detroit has one of the highest property tax rates in the state of Michigan, actually one of the highest property tax rates in the United States. There was also work done on assessment inequity, mostly by economists at Michigan State and urban planners at the University of Michigan. But before I started my work, nobody was looking at legality, right? I'm a law professor. And so my question was, because it was so clear, the Michigan State Constitution supporting case law and legislation is clear. No property in the state of Michigan can be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. So that means like people like me and my colleagues can come in and run the numbers to determine legality, unlike in other places where the standard is property taxes have to be fair, uniform, equal, which are all nebulous standards up to a judge to determine. My colleagues and I can come in and run the numbers to determine illegality in Detroit, and that's precisely what we did, and our findings were shocking. The first study I did, the finding is that between 2009 and 2015, in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 55 and 85% of properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. Up to 85% of the properties in Detroit. And when we broke that down into what we call 5 quintiles, quintile 1 being the lowest valued homes, quintile 5 being the highest valued homes, we found that in quintile 1 and 2, 95% or more of the homes were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, where in quintile 5, the majority of the homes were actually being assessed under the constitutional limit, and less than 20% were being assessed in violation of the constitutional limit. So what does that mean? That means that this burden of illegality is being borne by the homeowners in the lowest valued homes. The most vulnerable homeowners are being affected by this structural inequity. All right, so many of you know, you guys are following city people, right? You know that about Detroit's bankruptcy, and Detroit gets taken over by an emergency manager. But what most people don't know is because of this rampant illegality that I'm describing, Detroit's assessment division also gets taken over by the state, and they only gain back control at in 2017 because at the bottom of 2017, because at the top of the year, they finished a 50-year overdue parcel by parcel reassessment of every property in the city. And so the findings there, Chris actually, and his Center of Municipal Finance are the ones who did this assessment ratio study. And what we found here is that through the middle, things got better after this reassessment, but for the lowest valued homes, things did not get better. And so what that means in Detroit is, as you can see, higher valued homes, fancier homes, are paying a lower tax rate than the more modest, lower price homes, which are paying a higher tax rate, which often violates the Michigan state constitution. All right, so there are some reporters from the Detroit News who taught me a lesson, okay? Because we were doing all these projects about measuring assessment inequity, and these reporters did two things. Number one, they were like, people don't understand that. They want to know how much money they lost out of their pockets. And so they did a really remarkable analysis, and they're able to say the most conservative estimates possible is that between 2010 and 2016, the city of Detroit stole $600 million from the pockets of its taxpayers, okay? The second thing that they did that was so brilliant is they created an app in this particular news expose that came out where you could put your individual address in the app and see how much money you were stolen from individually. My God, talk about a city on fire. I had been trying to light the fire, telling people about this injustice, but once they were able to put their address in and see how much they were individually affected, the entire city lit up. There was mass protest at City Hall. You know, my prior work has been in South Africa, you know, so I know what a protest looks like, toy. But this protest that was happening in Detroit was just, the anger was palpable, right? Because people had been stolen from and now they knew how much. All right, then besides, so there's lots of things that cause tax foreclosure. You could be poor, have a divorce, unexpected medical bills, the list goes on and on. So the next study, Chris and I actually did this one together, holding all those other factors constant, we're able to say that 10% of all tax foreclosures would not have happened but for this illegality. And when we look at that bottom quintile, those lowest valued homes where I showed you that 95% or more were being overassessed, for those lowest valued homes, we're able to say that 1 in 4 of those homes would not have gone into property tax foreclosure but for this illegality. All right, let me just back up and give a review of what's going on here in Detroit. Step one, right? We have these unconstitutional property tax assessments, which are leading to illegally inflated property taxes that Detroiters cannot afford to pay. And when they could not afford to pay them, they have been subjected to property tax foreclosures at rates we haven't seen since the Great Depression. The fourth and final step of this puzzle that I have not yet spoken about is that 40% of Detroiters live below the poverty line. And in Michigan, when you live below the poverty line, you qualify for something called the poverty tax exemption. So you're not supposed to be paying taxes in the first place. But the city of Detroit did lots of things like not putting the property tax exemption online. And they actually did pretty invidious things like creating impossible processes. So at one point you literally had to go downtown, and all of you know how difficult any downtown in any city is, find parking, go up to the assessment office just to put your name on a list for them to mail you the application. Yes, it's as crazy as it sounds. They literally had to go downtown to apply in order to apply, right? And it was these types of tactics that prevented the majority of Detroit homeowners from receiving this entitlement, the poverty tax exemption. All right, so, and Detroit is not alone, right? So this is really a problem in Wayne County in general. Wayne County is a county in which Detroit sits. So in Wayne County, there are 43 municipalities in general, right? And I used to teach in Chicago, and I'm originally from Los Angeles. And when I got to Chicago, I was like, ooh, this is one of the most segregated places I have ever experienced. Honey, I came over here to Detroit. They make Chicago look like, you know, a little tea party, the level of segregation going on here in Wayne County. Of the 43 municipalities, 3 have a supermajority of African Americans and 33 have a supermajority of whites. White and Black people in Wayne County do not live next to each other. All right. That's horrible for the world, great for my study, because there is such a thing in Wayne County as a Black and white city that I can compare. Okay. And my findings are that the foreclosure rates in the majority Black cities were through the roof, where that was not the case, as you can see on the right side, for the majority white cities. But more importantly, for the majority Black cities, all 3 of them were experiencing these unconstitutional property tax assessments at an astronomical rate, whereas the majority of the supermajority white cities, the assessments were being done correctly. So what am I able to say here is that I always say, if you do work in Detroit and you don't directly deal with race, you're doing everyone a disservice. And so when you look at race specifically, you find that the majority Black cities in Wayne County are being subjected to illegally inflated property tax assessments and tax foreclosures at a far greater rate than the majority white cities. So this is not only a question of illegality, but this is a question of racialized illegality. All right, as Chris has already pointed out, this is also a national problem. Chris did a study, but there's also a phenomenal study, national study done by Carlos Avendaño León and Troop Howard. And they're able to tell us that at the national level, Blacks and Hispanics on average pay a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate for the same bundle of goods as whites. And when you live in a community that has more than the average number of Blacks and Latinos, these numbers go upwards. And this equals about $300 to $400 per year more in property taxes. So a lot of the conversation we've been having about the racial wealth divide has completely left out one important factor, which is this racialized property tax administration, which is occurring currently in our nation. All right, now this is one of from Chris's again center, and you can see Michigan is the second most regressive state in the union. I say anytime you're behind Alabama and ahead of Mississippi on anything having to do with race, you are in trouble. Michigan is in trouble. All right, so that was really depressing. But this is my favorite part of the presentation, where I get to talk about the fight back. All right, because that's what gives me hope. That's what brings light into my life, right? Is the fight back. There's three things. We formed the Coalition for Property Tax Justice, and the coalition has three goals. The first is to provide compensation for those who were illegally assessed and lost their homes for property taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. We have made tremendous progress on this note. We have partnered with an organization called GDI, Global Development Incubator, and we are finishing phase 1 and in phase 2 of something called the Dignity Restoration Compensation Project, where we are raising $100 million from all kinds of organizations to compensate Detroiters. And this is a really important intervention in this national reparations debate, because my argument is we don't need to start reparations for slavery and Jim Crow. We need to have reparations first for what happened yesterday in Detroit. That's where we need to start the reparations conversation, and then go backwards, right? Because this racialized dispossession is still occurring today. And that's our intervention with this Dignity Restoration Compensation Fund, which is, again, just entering phase 2. I'm just ridiculously excited. Such a blessing. Our second goal as a coalition is to stop these foreclosures. You wouldn't believe it, but, you know, all this evidence from so many different scholars of these illegally inflated property taxes, they're still foreclosing on people. You know, COVID was a curse, but it was a blessing in a lot of ways. Because of COVID, they stopped these foreclosures, and we were able to really organize while they stopped it. And now we have a situation where anybody who currently has property tax debt, we have a way to get their property tax debt to zero through a variety of mechanisms. And we're also using the COVID money that came through Michigan through a program called MyApp. We did a lot of organizing around that to expand the program requirements, and we're able to pay off past property tax debt. So right now we are in a mad rush trying to reach every Detroiter with past property debt, so we can use these federal dollars to wipe out that debt. So that's our second, is to stop these foreclosures and get these owner-occupied homes down to zero. And so we are, again, through the intervention with MISHTA, we are working hard to achieve that goal. Our third and final goal is what I really want to talk to this group about. And I have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to make it quick. It's to stop these illegally inflated overassessments. So we have a local strategy. We have a property tax reform ordinance that's coming before Detroit City Council, that's designed to fix a lot of the problem. One of my fellows and I took a 9-month class. Honey, being a professor and going back to school is a humbling experience. But I went back to become a certified Michigan assessor to figure out what's going on, so we can make reliable kind of interventions and suggestions, which we put in this property tax reform ordinance. Hopefully it'll be passed by the end of next month. At the state level, what we're trying to do is do some interventions there in terms of helping the state tax commission really get a better hold on helping localities reduce regressivity. But on the national level, we have 2 projects. Again, this is what I really want to talk to you about. And Stephanie, one of our fellows, should be in the chat. I want anyone interested to contact Stephanie. The first thing we're doing is, the Center for Municipal Finance and the Coalition have jointly created a HUD strategy that has 2 prongs. The first prong is we're going to really take the national data set that Chris has already created. We're going to add race into it. And that way, anyone across the country can type in their address and figure out if they are being overtaxed or if their jurisdiction is regressive. So the first step of the process is awareness. And then the second step is we want HUD to then, for the kind of top 10% of worst offenders, come in and not shame the jurisdiction or penalize them, but come in and provide help. These assessors are working hard and they need help. They're just working on antiquated systems from the 70s. They don't have modern, tools to help them move forward. And so providing these jurisdictions with help, putting them on a 2-year corrective action plan, which HUD does in lots of its other programs, for them to fix the regressivity in their jurisdiction. So we are now holding a monthly, starting next month, actually, will be the first inaugural. We're doing a national roundtable to really get ourselves together to really figure out how to push this HUD strategy forward, and for HUD to adopt this strategy to take care of this national problem of racialized property tax administration. And the last thing we're doing, that's what I call the top-down solution. The bottom-up solution is something called our Property Tax Appeal Project, which we're actually working, it works in 3 cities, Detroit, Chicago, we're working closely with Tiffany in Chicago, and Madison. And we're creating 3 different models, because no matter what, in any jurisdiction, the point is they're gonna get things wrong. And currently, there's only one program besides our programs in Atlanta that helps low-income homeowners file a property tax appeal for free. And so what we're doing is, in Detroit, we have a program that's based on community legal advocates doing the work. The program in Chicago is based on an international law firm doing the legal work. And the program in Madison, it's a law school clinic doing the legal work. And all 3 of those locations, we partner with organizations like Tiffany to do the wraparound services as well. But our goal is, once we finish these 3 pilots, we're then going to do a national launch to say, hey, any housing organization that is interested in incorporating this property tax appeal work into their existing services, we have a how-to kit and 3 models of how to do it that you can choose from to fit your particular context. So again, I'm out of time, but I just want to stop by saying, again, this is a national racial justice issue that, again, those of us committed to racial equality have got to start focusing on. And, there is a groundswell happening in terms of, fixing this problem. And so I'm just feel incredibly blessed to be part of that groundswell. Thanks.
And we are all blessed to have you taking that leadership too, Dr. Bernadette. Thank you so much. This is very inspiring, really exciting. I did want to make sure that Stephanie had the opportunity to let people know about the national convening. So I see that she put that in the chat. This is something that we can all get on board with. And I really love the idea of the way you framed it about getting some national entity, HUD in this case, to really assist these cities, because any of us who have worked with cities that have been on hard times know that every little new thing is a challenge, and they do need help to get this together. And really, our taxpayers can't wait. One of the things that was particularly shocking to me in talking with Tiffany is that even if, say, a homeowner is delinquent on their taxes, even if they've overpaid taxes for years and years and years, that overpayment cannot be credited toward their
It doesn't
so-called
automatically roll
amount.
over. Yeah, you're jumping through hoops going, fine, send me
Unbelievable.
the check so I can send you a check.
That's
It's
right. It's not
absolutely
even,
nutters.
yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so let's tackle these questions that are in the chat or in the Q&A. So Christy De Laurentiis,
De Laurentiis.
yes, just noting that in fact cities are losing revenue, and that's an important point. Cities should be on board with this as well. So Keith asks us, do you guys have any sense of underassessment about the relative amount of overassessment has to do, or underassessment has to do with challenges by owners. So I think one of you alluded to it's absolutely likely that the highest value property owners are the ones that are going to challenge the most.
Appealing early and often. Yes, they do.
Yeah, I'll take that one just since I have done a study on that. And I would say it certainly exacerbates the problem, but it's not the main event. The taxes are regressive from the get-go. Even before anyone has appealed, they're already regressive. And it's true that having the people at the top appeal those and get reductions makes it worse. But that's not the root cause, but it is something that makes it worse and should be dealt with.
Sure. And then Kermit, hey Kermit, how much of a problem is non-payment of property tax by non-resident?
I'm sorry, I just want to
Sure,
again
go
say
ahead.
one appeal issue. And I want to make sure everyone understands that there are private market solutions for this appeal, but no matter what, it doesn't work for poor people, right? Number one, the system that's mostly dominant in Chicago is the contingency system, where if they do your appeal, right, then they only get 10% of whatever they save you. But guess who? They're over there papering the higher valued houses, but it doesn't make financial sense in the contingency model for them to be serving lower valued homes, right? Because the tax saving is not going to be enough for them to make money. And so we have these lower valued homes not being serviced in this private sector appeal model of the contingency system. Then there's another appeal system called the flat fee system, which is dominant here in Michigan. And that's you just pay a flat fee for your property, the property tax appeal services. And that doesn't work for poor homeowners either, because the appeal services can cost $800, but your whole tax bill can be less than $800, right? So no matter where we turn, right, there are these private sector interventions, but they never work for low income homeowners or homeowners with low valued homes, I should say. So that's the importance of our property tax appeal project, is providing services to this population of low valued homes that is currently being completely unserviced.
And triaging with the education part too, right? So the wonderful thing between the professor and our organization is we do group education. But then there's a way to kind of triage. One of her fellows that's here, right, gets to survey and says, okay, you know what, we need to push this one to the property tax appeal process immediately, right? Because they're coming up for assessment though. So it's a triaging of the situation, but also make use, not just in Chicago at NHS, but make use of your HUD certified housing counselors, because there is in the post-purchase counseling sphere education on how to appeal those property taxes, what they need to know, and who they can refer you to, as well as making use of your local legal aids. We are super lucky in Chicago and Cook County for our seniors. The Center for Disability and Elder Law has a housing preservation channel. And so they actually work very closely with our seniors on their property taxes, so that we work in partnership and in tandem with them as well, right? So definitely it is an underserved population. There are resources out there. Are they to the degree that we need them to be? No. So that's why we're still fighting, but make sure we are using the tools in our tool belt that we have already as well.
That's great. Important distinction and reminder to both of you. Hey, Chris, while we're continuing with the questions, I wonder if you could pull up your mapping tool just so that we could give a little demo to people so they understand how it works.
Okay.
So meanwhile, and share your screen whenever you get there, just, you know, the map. So Kermit asked in particular about property tax by non-resident investor owners. You know, how much of a problem is that? How is that? Have any of you really focused on that, or are you mostly focused on justice for homeowners?
Wait, what's the question about owner occupiers versus non-owner?
Non-resident investor owners. So they're wondering, Kermit's wondering, I think something like, you know, when you think of all the delinquent property taxes, how much of it is really investors, absentee investors versus owner occupants?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a huge problem here in Detroit, right? Is that because in Illinois, as Tiffany so excellently described, there's a tax lien sales system. There's a different system here in Michigan, and that's the auction. So after 3 years delinquent, you get a yellow bag on your door. And if you don't pay the taxes, it's sold by the Wayne County Treasurer in a centralized auction. And because it's a centralized auction that is online, it has allowed investors from Japan, there's a whole contingent from Argentina, the suburbs, all over, a lot of California, to come in and buy these homes, again, that were illegally inflated and going through foreclosure for property taxes they should not have been paying in the first place. And so part of the, I'm writing a book right now about all of this. And that's the, well, maybe we shouldn't give away the, most revealing part of the book. Yeah, my editor would be like, girl, stop talking. But it's about when you follow the money, right? It's really important to follow the money to figure out who, in fact, is financially benefiting from all of this in Detroit.
Okay. So, and then Anna Laura, whoops. Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, can you walk us through how to look at our own communities, Chris?
Sure, I'll just give you one quick example so people can go on their own, but you'll come to this website again, propertytaxproject.uchicago.edu. If you're interested, you can find the research under related research, but assuming you're coming for the reports, you click interactive reports, and oops, sorry about that, scroll a little too fast. You can then put in your county or city. I don't know who we have on the call.
How about Des Moines, Iowa? Oh no. Okay, fine. Which is
here. All right, we're going to go with Des Moines just because it was said, just to keep it. You can download the report as a PDF, but let's assume we just want to kind of explore it more.
It's actually Polk County, guys. Des Moines is Polk County.
Oh,
Polk,
well, I
that's
chose Des Moines
very
County,
good.
so
It's like, why do I know that? But yeah.
In any event, it's going to be the same report for any county. It's got a variety of, results here. The first is that graph. So remember the graph I was showing you, you'll see that graph using the local data. This is kind of similar to a graph that Bernadette showed, like probability to be over or under assessed depending on your value. We translate that into tax rates, similar thing, and then we give you the actual numbers that underlie the graph. I don't want to go through, we go through some like assessment industry standards, which I'll kind of skip over. If you were an assessor, you might care more about these. Then we give you some maps, based on your census tract, so you can see, what does your area look like. Unless somebody knows Des Moines County, I'm going to kind of skip that. And then we correlate this with demographic, variables. We run regressions to tell you. So here, not surprisingly, this is telling you that tax rates for white areas are less. That negative means lower taxes. You see some graphs. I don't want to belabor all the details of the report, but you can go through and find all this and lots more statistics in there. So
go back to that
the biggest
map.
gist is you go there, you choose your county, you get the report.
You can zoom in on those maps and really look at the census tract level. And
that's right.
Tiffany and Chris and I were doing that just right away in Chicago, just so we could really figure out what are the middle neighborhoods in Chicago and to what extent are they, are parts of them affected by this as well? And absolutely they are. So, okay. Let's see, Anna Laura, Tiffany, can you please repeat / explain how Black and brown people lose their properties due to tax sales? And
I have a hard stop at 1:30, so I just want to just in
Thank
case I
you
drop.
so much. We're coming up on that. Everybody, don't miss the National Property Tax Justice meeting, and really figure out ways to follow Bernadette's work. It's amazing. We're gonna, I guess we should do a time check here and just say we'll continue on with some of the Q&A for those of you who can stay. And just to let you know that we have an upcoming webinar that's going to have somebody talking about retrofitting middle neighborhood housing stock for energy efficiency and climate resiliency. He's been working with Department of Energy a lot on trying to design the programs that are going to put that $38 billion out on the street. That has to do with, that was part of the infrastructure bill. So you're not going to want to miss that. And then we also have an engagement chat. We're toggling between two possible topics: finding leaders in your community, or possibly using AI to engage with residents, on October 18th. So the other thing, skip ahead to the signing up for our community practice. And isn't that one of our slides? Anyway, I will do, there we go. Don't forget to sign up for the community practice so that you can be aware of all of these webinars that we're doing. And also you can get on our Google group too, where I do more short-term quick updates. Like I may put in to the Google group this upcoming tax justice event that's happening too. And I do want to thank each and every one of our presenters. Let's see if any of them can stay to do a little bit more Q&A. In
I was
Detroit.
just going to say, sorry, Marsha, real quick. If you do have to drop off, we encourage you to keep the conversation going, though. Chris and I are both in Chicago. I am at NHS Chicago. You can always reach me at tsmith@nhschicago.org. And 9 times out of 10, you'll see me running around some rando neighborhood, because that is where I am most comfortable and what I love most about our city. It is a city of neighborhoods. And yes, we've got our challenges and we are segregated in certain ways, but I actually don't have to buy a plane ticket to go around the world.
That's right. So I think this is interesting. Just in Detroit in particular is what Christy was asking about. The taxes that we're talking about, does that include schools taxes, or are we just only talking about?
So a portion in Cook County, our taxes do go towards the education system in Cook County, but it also goes to other municipal services. Sorry, go ahead, Christopher.
But
No,
the
I'm sorry,
overtaxing.
I was just going to say, yeah, in general, everything we've talked about is the collective tax bill. So whatever tax bill you see when you pay your taxes is an accumulation of usually a bunch of different taxing jurisdictions. And we've been referring to the collection of all of them.
Okay, that's good. Accessing foreclosure data. I'm assuming that's still sort of a place by place situation.
And probably should be clear about the language, right? Because so it is often referred to as property tax sale foreclosure in Detroit. Yes. It's not so much referred to as property tax foreclosure in Cook County, although I have started embracing that language so that people do understand the magnitude and impact of the property tax sale on our communities. It is very startling when you actually see that list by ward of how many homes are on that property tax sale list. It'll just shake you to your nerves. And anyone who went through the 2008 challenges knows how impactful it is on our Black and brown communities. They always say what the country gets a cold and we get pneumonia. We are still recovering as far as trying to get our property values back from a pre-2008 debacle era. So I want us really paying attention to property tax sales and their impact on our communities, not just on the property values though too, but also on the cost of maintenance of our communities and public safety in our communities. It is an issue that has so many downstream impacts that are too numerous to go through in this conversation, but we can definitely build upon them in later conversations if that is what people want, and you should let Anne and Marsha know. But I want us really raising this to the level of national attention that it deserves, to the point of, in Illinois, much like they did in Michigan, the Illinois Homeowners Assistance Fund, we did use COVID dollars, and that fund is still open. So if you have not applied in Illinois, you can use those dollars for your delinquent property taxes. And definitely reach out to us, or any housing association, or go to ilhaf.org, and we can help you there and apply for those funds. But it is to that point where, those of you who remember, we had the hardest hit funds, and back in the early days of the foreclosure challenges. It is to that level, and we need to give it that level of attention.
But the tax foreclosure data should be available from your tax assessors. Is it usually hard to get, or it depends?
Speaking to the data specifically, it can be a bit challenging just because of the way the systems are organized from place to place. And as Tiffany said, sometimes they call it tax foreclosure, sometimes they call it something else. Most jurisdictions do have a tax lien sale of some kind, often under that name. Yeah, and unfortunately, it does appear that you really have to go jurisdiction by jurisdiction to get that data. So you would need to start locally. And if I were advising someone in a local area, I would start with the term tax lien sale. That's probably your best bet to begin finding the data.
That's great. Maybe that could be, I feel like we need to do a part 2 webinar, and maybe that's part of what we talk about, is how to do that. Debbie Goldberg saying that HUD will soon be finalizing a new fair housing planning of the AFFH rule, which will require jurisdictions to create and implement equity plans. This seems like the kind of issue that they should be assessing and addressing in that process. Have you thought about how the equity planning process might be a vehicle for?
I would say that we've had some conversations with HUD, at least Bernadette and I have, and Tiffany may have separately. HUD does not directly regulate property tax assessment. That's considered a local issue. They regulate more. There's more room for them to act on the appraisal side of things, which they are doing. It would be great if they integrate some property tax assessment stuff, but my sense from their initial reaction is that that's not an area that they directly regulate or control.
Interesting, but at a local level, it seems like something you could advocate for. It should be in your grinding the axe issues.
Yeah, and certainly states tend to regulate local assessors. So I think in terms of a more systematic approach, as opposed to one jurisdiction at a time, I think states are perhaps a more promising vehicle than the federal government, though we'd all love to see HUD do a little bit more.
I'm about to start participating in the city housing planning process in Tucson. So believe me, I'll bring this up. Kelly is in Newburgh, and Newburgh, New York. And they have this huge issue where they believe that investors are undertaxed compared to owner occupants. And the question is, how would you suggest going about documenting and addressing those inequalities? So first of all, how can she find out, test the hypothesis?
You could test the hypothesis either with your local assessment data or with the kind of data I've been using from a vendor called CoreLogic. There are other vendors. First American is another good one. You can see the buyer and seller of each property at the time of sale and link that to the assessed value and the sale price, and you could then know whether investors are over or under taxed. My suspicion is that there would not be a bias of that kind built into the system of assessment itself, but because investors are more sophisticated, I would expect them to be less likely to buy a property that's overassessed in the first place, or more likely to appeal and to use the system to get the taxes reduced after the fact. That's just a guess.
That's a good point. And Kelly, why don't you text me about or chat me about what organization you work for? Because I'm about to start doing some strategic planning with the organization in Newburgh. Maybe we can figure out how to incorporate this. Are there
and then Marcia, also one of the things we're trying to toy with. So I'm Christy, I really want to stick with that concept. So please loop me into that conversation. We're looking for proxies to identify what's owner occupied versus investor. And so one of those ways is to use, if you have homeowner or homestead exemptions, right? Was there that exemption taken, or are they eligible for it when you kind of get in contact with them to determine if that is an owner occupied versus an investor? But if you come up with a better way, we are so interested.
Hey, Tiffany,
Yeah.
you and I are going to talk anyway about other stuff, but I have been working on that.
I know, I think we're going
myself.
long.
So let's you and I talk. I have maybe a better way, or at least a
Oh,
different way.
cool.
Awesome.
Okay.
We
Awesome.
could
And I'll
try
see you
it
next
together
week.
and
So
see
there you
who's
go.
better.
Perfect.
right.
right.
Yeah. So you two, Chris and Tiffany, let me know when you really have to go, but I'll keep going till you tell me that. How do you advise homeowners to appeal their assessments when they live in cities where almost all properties are underassessed? This seems, let's see, we might need to know more about that. This seems to make individual appeals less likely to succeed, even when low-income homeowners are paying more than their fair share of taxes. If that person is still around, why don't you unmute yourself and tell us a little bit more? And meanwhile, we'll go on. How do you
I
translate?
can make a quick comment
yeah.
on that if you want, because this is really an important problem.
Oh,
In
okay.
order to successfully appeal your taxes, you have to show that somebody else with a home similar to yours has been assessed at a lower rate than you. And then you say, hey, look, I'm assessed at this much, and look, here's someone with a similar home. The problem is similar in this definition typically means in the same neighborhood. And so what's going on is assessors are over-assessing all the homes in your neighborhood, or all the homes in neighborhoods similar to yours, i.e. other Black and brown neighborhoods are being over-assessed. You're not going to be able to find that comparable property that's assessed less than you in order to appeal, because those homes are all on a different part of town where the richer people live. And the assessor will say, but that home's not similar to yours. And so it really can be a barrier to appealing an unfair tax if they've unfairly taxed everybody like you. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, true.
Okay. How do you translate the example of regressivity in a levy jurisdiction to a system based on millage rates? I feel like I just repeated Greek phonetically.
Yeah, and I think Bernadette's example of Detroit is like that. When there is just a fixed rate, and so it's your value times the rate, everything else is true in the sense that if you're assessed too high, they're multiplying that high number times the rate, and you're going to pay a higher tax than you should. The tax shifting aspect of it is a little bit different, because in a millage-based or rate-based system, the fact that one person is under-assessed doesn't mean everyone else has to be over-assessed. It just means the jurisdiction's going to get less money. So the implications are a little bit different, but the end result is going to be the same. That if you're over-assessed, you're going to be overtaxed.
Okay. And Erica, also in Newburgh, a lot of us observing an inequity in the property assessments. City supposedly assesses at 100% of market value every year, but the assessment across the city do not seem to actually reflect market value. So she guesses her question is, what kinds of data should we be collecting to demonstrate the kinds of inequity and lost revenue this leads to? So how can she challenge the market value, the assessment process?
I would suggest maybe you start by going and finding the analogous report on the website I directed you to for Newburgh. And that should provide actually most of the data that you would need to show the systemic nature of the problem. For any given property, you still have to collect its individual data, but you can see the systemic data from downloading the report from the website.
Very interesting. She goes on to say, more recently purchased home assessments are consistently rising, but the homes that were purchased more than 5 years ago don't seem to reflect market value. So that's very interesting. Yes. So why don't you take a look at that, Erica, to start? And also, let me know what organization you work with in Newburgh. So I think that is the end of our question list here, except I skipped over, are there training programs for assessors? Specifically in Chicago? I'm sure there are.
There are. I think, yes, I put my contact information in the chat. Feel free to email me and we can definitely continue the conversation, but there are resources for that.
Great. Okay. Well, everybody, I think we're going to wrap this up. You will get a evaluation form to fill out, but what's most important to us about that is the section that asks for other topics you'd like to see us address. So
yes.
It would be really helpful to have you talk about specifically, if to the extent that you do want more on this topic, what you'd like that's more about this topic, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you so much, Chris and Tiffany, and to Bernadette, who's gone. But it's so unusual for me to learn about an issue and already have data to help with it. That never happens. You know, usually I'm at the end where nobody really knows. So this feels really actionable, and that is such a relief in our work. So appreciate all of your work and your ongoing work, and keep us posted, and we'll hope to have you back. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Have a
Thank you
great
so
one.
much.